say I'm way too obsessed, and I've got nothing left, and I'm not quite there.
This is the second chapter of The Son of Darkness within the novel The Chronicles of Darkness. If you haven't already heard the first chapter, go back to the last video and listen to it first. If you have, enjoy. Yui'loon, in the country, the Republic of Alatia, in the First Creed, on December 24th, 4162 AD. Selena and Rock are going to get their asses kicked, Dethaalis said. Instructor Melgo stood at the edge of the sandpit, watching the students as they approached the center, squinting his eyes from the bright suns, one blue and one orange. Elder Serial gazed onto the fighting pits with intrigue, running his fingers over the wooden railings. "Ha! You wake up dumber or something, Peth?" Yui'loon said, throwing his arm around her neck before pulling her close. "Selena and Rock are going to walk all over Dilemma and Visco. Everyone knows that they're at the top of our class. Besides, nobody's ever beaten them." She pushed her head free of his arm before smacking the back of his head. "Wait and see, dummy. I'm always right." Both groups took their positions across from one another. Visco held a staff, and his partner Dilemma was equipped with a neat invention of wooden arm blades, strapped to her arms by leather bindings. Selena gripped onto her chain blade. Instead of metal tips, they were wood. Rock carried a training katana, the pair's original and predictable weapon set. There was something off about Selena and Rock. Selena was glaring at her opponents as if she wanted to tear their throats open. It wasn't uncommon for her to be cruel. It was her anger which threw Yui'loon off. Rock, on the other hand, didn't seem to care if they overcame the final test of the year or not. Peth knew something which Yui'loon didn't. Still, nobody's ever beaten them. "This test will determine what you've learned throughout the year. I'd suggest doing your best. Powerful eyes are looking down on you," the instructor said, shouting as was his usual tone. The man never stopped yelling. It was straining. "Begin!" As soon as the words left the instructor's lips, they were at each other's throats. It wasn't savage as hounds would be. They were moving in unison with their partner, in tune with each other as they would be an arm or leg. Even the slightest dysfunction in their movements was noticeable, and that's all it was with Selena and Rock. The smallest change dramatically affected them. If a shadow couldn't align themselves with their other half, then the side that could would annihilate the other. As Peth had guessed, Selena and Rock were struck repeatedly, only making contact with their opponents a couple of times. It was the most awing of sights. All the students and instructor alike were taken aback once Selena hit the ground, stunned and nearly unconscious. Of her and Rock, she was superior in combat, the favorite of the instructor. Rock held his index and middle finger up, signifying surrender. "Oh yeah, in your face," Visco said, jumping around as if he'd bested an elder. He quickly calmed himself, catching a glance from Dilemma. Her brows were raised, staring at him as if he was insane. "Take those failures to the boxes. It'll be their new home for the next 4 days, the instructor said through gritted teeth. "Oh, come on, anything but that," Rock begged. "Shut up, boy. If you can't prove yourself, you're nothing to us." A guardian, a man dressed in all black and known for their cold demeanor, threw Selena over his shoulder. They were the protectors of the creeds, but also its enforcers. Another demanded Rock to follow. He complied, hesitantly, fear dwelling over him. Yui'loon didn't blame him. The boxes were one of the worst punishments. Yui'loon was at the bottom of the class, and so he knew it as a second home. Bamboo walls with no room to move and no cover from the weather. The victims of those prisons received no food nor water for the span of their punishment. If it hadn't been for Peth always sticking up for him, he would have died along with the many others throughout the last few years. He was always failing his solo tests. Whiplashings, kneeling on rice, beatings, burnings, the box, and magical torture were things he knew all too well. Without the magical influence of the clan, he would have been scarred and broken long ago. "How'd you know?" Yui'loon asked. She smirked. "You need to keep your eyes and ears open. They had a huge argument about something and have been bickering for the last week. In that state, they weren't prepared to work together. They were a mess." Yui'loon elbowed her. "Don't get on my bad side. We both know that I'm always carrying you to victory." She raised her brows, her lip quirking upward in amusement. Before she could speak, the obnoxious voice of the instructor interrupted them. "Yui'loon and Dethaalis, step forward. Opposing them, Karak and Isabel." Yui'loon grabbed a staff, spinning the weapon over his head before doing a front flip and bowing to Peth. She lightly smacked him over the head with her training katana. "Looking good. You should join the circus." "Ah, how they would love me there," he said before turning toward their opponents. Crack and Isabel bowed their heads and closed their eyes, praying to the Creator. It was something which had earned them many twisted glares from the elders time and time again, as Dethaalis was the only one which was approved for worshipping. Isabel spoke once finished. I wish the two of you luck. May the best of us persevere. Stop fucking talking. These are your enemies, not your allies, Instructor Malgo growled. Begin. Peth leapt forward, kicking sand into Isabel's face before striking her chest. She grunted, stumbling back. Crack moved for Peth, but Yui'loon blocked his path, pushed him aside. Crack kept his eyes locked on them until Isabel rejoined him at his side. Come now, you can surrender. It's pointless fighting against the inevitable, Yui'loon said. Crack chuckled. Yui'loon, I'm sorry that I'll have to send you back to the box again. Isabel and Crack moved in unison, striking them. They traded blows and kicks, a few slipping by their defenses. Crack and Isabel easily defended against Yui'loon's predictable attacks, taking more hits from Peth. They mostly concentrated on Yui'loon as his defense was poor. However, he was accustomed to suffering and laughed the pain off as blood dribbled from his broken nose and bruises covered his face. Peth struck Crack's jaw, and as he grunted, Yui'loon fell to the ground and swept his legs out from under him. As Yui'loon leapt on top of Crack, Peth moved in between them and Isabel, blocking her path. Before Crack could react, Yui'loon pinned his arms to the ground and punched his face. Surrender, my friend! It's over, Yui'loon laughed. Never! He shouted, half smiling as Yui'loon struck him again. Crack lifted his head, trying to avoid the next strike. Yui'loon's fist grazed the side of his jaw, landing true in the center of his throat. The sound of his bones breaking inward came before the gurgling for air. His face turned blue as he struggled for breath, his neck crushed. We need a Darkrite, someone that can cast magic. He needs to be healed, Yui'loon shouted, jumping off of Crack. Isabel sprinted to her partner's side, grabbing his shoulders. Please don't close your eyes. Don't leave me. Nobody moved, the students staring at the instructor. Some of them were shocked, while others revealed no sign of emotion. Neither Instructor Malgo or Elder Serial did a thing to help. Elder Serial smirked, watching Crack as he grabbed Isabel's hand and stared into her eyes, pleading for her to save him while he slowly suffocated. Yui'loon froze in place, his gaze locked with the pale, distant eyes of Crack. Isabel was sobbing, screaming in agony as she held onto his corpse. It was cut short as she was struck on the back of the head by the pommel of a blade. The guardian caught her and threw her over his shoulder. Bring her to the tower. She failed, Instructor Malgo commanded. The tower? What's that? What's going to happen to her? Yui'loon mumbled, moving toward the guardian. Back in place, child, Serial said, his voice chilling. Move on with the exercise. Peth placed a gentle hand on Yui'loon's shoulder, leading him toward the rest of the students. I've heard that's where they take everyone who's lost a partner, and they never return. I'm so sorry. I know he was your friend, and a first kill. I'm here for you. Later that night, Yui'loon slipped through the tower window, guardians standing at the entrance below, appearing small from where he was. There were no guardians patrolling the stairwell as he moved toward the top of the tower. He kept from placing his hands on the walls, wearing black gloves and a black cloak which covered his face tightly. If he left any traces, the Creed's Darkrites would track him. Moans of a man and the whimpering of a girl sung through the halls like a dying melody. It was torture to the ears, especially as the girl's cries ripped across the walls, painful enough to wake a corpse from its slumber. She began to beg, her voice belonging to Isabel. But as the pleading words escaped her lips, she was silenced, grunting in pain. The door to the top of the tower was left open, and in the center of the room there was an old ragged bed. It was the only thing within the chambers. A man was facing away from Yui'loon, unmistakably Elder Rokon, one of the leaders of the First Creed. He was bare, covered in glowing blue magical runes. Isabel was tied to the bed, her face bruised, and her eyes swollen black. Tears covered her cheeks, and blood ravaged her naked body. Rokon, without mercy, was forcing himself on her, pulling her dirty blonde hair back before biting her neck. Isabel's eyes locked with Yui'loon's, his body frozen in horror. As soon as Yui'loon took his first step forward, determined to stop the act, a hand grabbed his arm. He quickly turned, and before any words could leave his lips, Instructor Malgo slammed his palm against Yui'loon's mouth. Shh, boy. You don't want to be caught, he said. With his other hand, the instructor turned Yui'loon back around so that he could witness the horrid sight, removing his hand from Yui'loon's lips. Don't say a word. If you're punished for being here and killed, Pethelany will receive the same fate as Isabel. Why? Yui'loon whispered, staring at Isabel, who still hadn't moved her gaze from his. Isabel closed her eyes as the elder mercilessly raped her, praying to the Creator. Sobs left her mouth in between the words which she mumbled. Her forehead creased in agony with each thrust that came from the elder. Her prayers were the only thing distracting her from the torture being inflicted onto her. Shadows of the Creeds have a unique bloodline, which none other bear. That's how the elders can move through the shadows, along with some of our veterans. We're natural killers, born and bred that way. But why do that? Yui'loon asked, his eyes wide. Malygos snickered. The runes ensure pregnancy. She will give birth to 2 children who will take her place in her partner's place. This is necessary for survival. I want you to remember that. If you die, this will happen to Pethelini, or vice versa. Now get out of here, and don't say a word about this to anybody. If you do, you won't be around to protect your precious fish girl. Yui'loon watched the terror in front of him for another moment, guilt seizing his heart. He clenched his fists before hanging his head in shame and turning away. So he is. Once back at the window, Yui'loon paused, staring at the full moon. Images captured his mind. Pethelini in the same place as Isabel, ravaged and broken, forced to carry 2 children born of evil. It was his worst nightmare, the thing he'd prevent if it meant giving up all else. I will no longer be a burden. This life isn't a joke, and nothing about it is humorous as I've made it out to be. It's kill or be killed, and I've risked enough by slacking. I will never end up in the box again. I will never fall behind again, because every time I do, I'm putting you in danger. Peth.
I will not let them win. I won't stop till the end. No.